The penetrating chill of the night enveloped the hospital like a sinister cloak as the novice anesthesiologist, Dr. Daniel, walked through the silent corridors. He was a young doctor freshly graduated, eager to gain practical experience in a real working environment. His first night shift seemed promising until he came across the notice taped to the break room wall: "Warning, abandoned ward, do not enter." Curious by nature, Daniel had heard the dark tales that had haunted the hospital for decades. The abandoned ward was the epicenter of rumors: medical devices turning on by themselves, shadows moving at night, and even reports from nurses claiming to have seen deceased patients wandering the halls. It's just a fairy tale to scare newcomers, Daniel thought, trying to convince himself as he donned his white coat and prepared his instruments. He was assigned to oversee the surgical ward, a critical area where life and death intersected with each procedure. The atmosphere inside the hospital shifted drastically as the night wore on. Fluorescent lights cast distorted shadows on the walls, and the silence was occasionally broken by the hum of automatic respirators. As he prepared for his first anesthesia, Daniel felt an inexplicable discomfort, as if something was watching him from afar. He glanced at the door to the abandoned ward, just a few meters away. The corridor light reflected off the dirty windows, lending the area an even darker aspect. "Maybe I should take a look, just to satisfy my curiosity," Daniel thought, shaking his head to dispel unsettling thoughts. Entering the operating room, Daniel tried to focus on the task at hand, blocking out the supernatural stories floating in his mind. But as he began administering anesthesia to the sedated patient, a sudden chill enveloped him. Monitors around the patient's bed blinked intermittently, as if responding to an invisible presence that only Daniel seemed to feel. It was in this atmosphere of anticipation and unease that the night at the hospital began, with Dr. Daniel confronting his own curiosity and the dark secrets the hospital held. As Dr. Daniel administered the anesthesia, the silence in the operating room was almost palpable. He focused on the monitors and the tubes connected to the patient, trying to ignore the feeling that something was amiss. Suddenly, a cold breeze passed through the room, causing him to shiver involuntarily. That was when Daniel saw something that chilled him to the core. In the darkest corner of the room, where the light barely reached, he glimpsed a shadow moving swiftly. His eyes widened in surprise and fear as he tried to rationalize what he had just seen. "It must have been my imagination," he muttered to himself, squinting and staring back at the patient. But the sensation persisted, as if something was watching him closely, waiting for a moment of distraction. The monitors began flashing more intensely, reflecting Daniel's growing anxiety. He forced himself to take deep breaths and continue with the procedure, trying not to let his unease show to the surgical team around him. As he adjusted the anesthesia levels, Daniel felt a cold touch on his shoulder. He instinctively turned, but there was no one there. His heart began to beat faster as he considered the possibility that something supernatural was happening. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself, as his mind struggled to find logical explanations for the inexplicable events. Then, a low, indistinct voice whispered in his ear. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked around frantically, but everyone in the room was busy with their tasks, unaware of what he was experiencing. The feeling of being watched intensified, leaving him with a sense of vulnerability he had never felt before. Whatever was in the hospital that night seemed to be getting closer to Daniel, challenging his sanity and courage. He knew he needed to uncover the truth behind these events before it was too late, but facing the unknown within the hospital itself proved to be a daunting and dangerous task. After the disturbing incident in the operating room, Dr. Daniel could no longer ignore his curiosity about the hospital's abandoned ward. With every step through the shadowy corridors, he felt a haunting presence, as if something was waiting for him beyond the locked doors of that forbidden area. Driven by the need to understand what was happening, Daniel decided to investigate. The abandoned ward was located at the far end of the hospital, away from the areas frequented by medical staff during the day. As he approached the rusted metal doors, a chill ran down his spine. With trembling hands, he pushed open one of the doors, which creaked loudly as it swung open. The interior was shrouded in deep darkness, with only the faint light of his flashlight to guide him. The air inside the abandoned ward was thick and heavy, as if it were laden with decades of untold stories and dark secrets. Daniel walked through deserted corridors, passing empty beds covered with dusty sheets and abandoned examination tables. In some rooms, he found slightly ajar doors that moved slightly, as if someone had just passed through. The echo of his own footsteps seemed amplified, echoing through the worn walls and broken windows. As he ventured deeper, Daniel began to hear whispering voices around him. They were soft and indistinct, murmuring words he could not understand. His skin tingled with fear, but he pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the stories that haunted the place. In a room at the end of the corridor, Daniel found a stack of old medical records. He carefully flipped through them, revealing accounts of patients admitted with mysterious illnesses and unexplained symptoms. Some of these patients had died under strange circumstances, while others simply disappeared from the records, as if they had never been there. Faded photos on the pages showed pale, blurred figures hovering in the background, as if silently observing the unfolding events. Daniel felt a chill as he recognized the same shadows he had seen in the operating room, now captured in old films and photographs worn by time. With each step he took in the abandoned ward, Daniel felt he was getting closer to unraveling the dark secrets the hospital held. However, he also realized that the deeper he delved into the darkness, the more he risked awakening something that should not be disturbed. As Dr. Daniel leafed through the old medical records in the abandoned ward, a growing sense of horror overtook him. The detailed accounts of patients with inexplicable illnesses and mysterious deaths echoed in his mind, like pieces of a macabre puzzle he was trying to piece together. Some of the records dated back decades, describing diagnoses that challenged the medical understanding of the time. Daniel found cases of patients who, after being admitted, disappeared without a trace or were found dead under disturbing circumstances. There were vague mentions of inexplicable phenomena during medical procedures, such as equipment malfunctioning for no apparent reason and shadows that seemed to move independently. The old photographs in the medical records were even more disturbing. Blurred and faded images captured indistinct figures in the background, some of which Daniel thought he had seen in the shadows of the abandoned ward. He could no longer ignore the connection between the strange events he had witnessed and the mysteries buried in the hospital's dark history. In one last drawer of dusty files, Daniel found an unusual record. It was a handwritten account by a doctor from the past, describing frequent encounters with an inexplicable presence in the abandoned ward. The doctor mentioned visions of deceased patients returning to haunt the empty corridors at night, their voices echoing between rooms like a distant echo from beyond. With a shiver, Daniel realized that these stories were not just urban legends to scare newcomers. There was truth in them, something he was now facing directly. The fear that had once seemed irrational now justified itself in the face of the disturbing evidence he had found. As he closed the old records and returned them to the drawer, Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he could no longer ignore the inexplicable events he had witnessed, nor the mysteries buried in the dark past of that hospital. But to uncover the truth behind these mysteries, he would need to confront the supernatural forces determined to keep their secrets buried. With his heart racing and his mind filled with unanswered questions, Daniel knew his journey through the hospital was far from over. He was now determined to uncover what was really happening, even if it meant facing the unknown head-on. Determined to unravel the macabre secrets haunting the hospital, Dr. Daniel delved deeper into his investigation. He spent sleepless nights sifting through old records, interviewing older staff members, and exploring forgotten areas of the building. Each step brought him closer to the truth, but also increased the danger he faced. During one of those nights, as he ventured into the abandoned ward again, Daniel was confronted by a palpable and sinister presence. A spectral figure, pale and twisted, emerged from the dark shadows in front of him. The air around him seemed to freeze as the specter approached slowly, emitting a low, anguished moan. The anesthesiologist instinctively recoiled, his mind spinning with fear and uncertainty. He now knew he wasn't dealing with mere legends or inexplicable phenomena. There was a real supernatural force in the hospital, an entity that did not rest in peace. With his heart pounding wildly, Daniel made a desperate decision. He confronted the specter, demanding answers to the disturbing events he had witnessed. In response, the figure only lamented and dissolved before his eyes, leaving a sense of emptiness and desolation in the air. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, Daniel left the hospital, carrying with him the haunted memories of that night. He would never return to the site, but the experiences he had lived through would haunt him forever, reminding him that not all mysteries are meant to be unraveled. Months later, the hospital closed its doors due to serious maintenance issues, according to the official statement. But the rumors persisted among former employees and locals, speaking of inexplicable phenomena and spectral sightings that defied explanation. Dr. Daniel, now practicing in another city, never forgot the horrors he had witnessed in that hospital. He learned to trust his instincts and respect the boundaries between the known and the unknown, understanding that some mysteries are better left untouched. To this day, he occasionally wakes up in a cold sweat, haunted by the chilling whispers and spectral figures he encountered during his time at the hospital. The experience changed him profoundly, teaching him the limits of human understanding and the enduring presence of the supernatural in our world. And so, the story of Dr. Daniel and the haunted hospital continues to be whispered among those who dare to explore the darker corners of the human experience, a reminder that some mysteries are best left buried in the shadows.